Ethan always noticed the way Lena's eyes lingered just a second too long. It wasn't obvious, at least not to anyone else, but he felt it. The way her gaze softened whenever he spoke, the way her laughter bubbled up at his smallest jokes, like he was the most entertaining man in the room. It wasn't forced. That was the most dangerous part. It felt real. She came to the cafe almost every afternoon, always claiming it was for the quiet. Yet somehow, she always found her way to the seat closest to him. Her hair would fall loosely over her shoulder, and when he looked up from his laptop, she was already smiling, a warm, knowing smile. She played with the rim of her coffee cup, fingers delicate and deliberate, as if she wanted to draw his attention without asking for it outright. And it worked. There was something electric in the way she moved. Not exaggerated. Subtle. When she laughed, she'd tilt her head slightly, exposing the curve of her neck. When she listened, she leaned forward, as though every word he said mattered. She mirrored him without thinking, crossing her legs when he did, resting her chin in her hand when he looked thoughtful, and then there was the way she touched him. Not inappropriately. No one would call it that. It was always light, always casual, a brush of her fingers when she handed him a napkin, a playful nudge when she teased him about working too hard. But it lingered just long enough to make him wonder. She wore her wedding ring, but she twisted it absent-mindedly whenever the conversation got too deep. Like it was a reminder. Like she was weighing it against something else. He tried to convince himself it was nothing. Politeness. Maybe she was just friendly. But there was an intensity in the air whenever she was near him, something that pulled tighter with every glance, every half-second of silence hanging between their words. It wasn't just in his head. He could feel it. The tension wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, the way a fire smolders before it burns. And every time she laughed, every time her eyes met his and held for just a moment too long, it was as if she was saying something without words. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. Not yet. But it was something. Something that made his pulse quicken every time she walked in. Something that made it hard to look away. It wasn't supposed to go this far. That was the thought running through Lena's mind as she sat across from Ethan, the conversation flowing easier than it ever had with anyone else. She wasn't sure how it happened, how small talk about work turned into something deeper, something raw. She found herself telling him things she never meant to share. How it felt to be married but lonely. How silence had become the loudest part of her home. He listened in a way that made her feel seen. Not just heard, really seen. His eyes stayed steady on hers, his expression soft, understanding. No judgment. No impatience. She hadn't realized how much she needed that until now, and he wasn't just listening. He was paying attention. He noticed the way her voice cracked when she talked about her husband working late again. He picked up on the way she sighed between sentences, like she was carrying something too heavy to name. He asked the kind of questions that made her want to keep talking, like he genuinely cared about the answers. Somewhere between the laughter and the confessions, the air shifted. The space between them felt smaller. She didn't know if it was the dim light, the way his hand rested so casually on the table, or the warmth in his voice when he said her name, but something changed. She reached out without thinking, brushing her fingers against his wrist, as she made a joke about how they always ended up being the last two in the cafe. It should have been nothing. Just a touch. But when he didn't pull away, when his eyes met hers with a quiet intensity, it felt like everything, the room faded. There were people around them, but it didn't matter. She was too aware of the way her heart was pounding. Too aware of the fact that she hadn't felt this alive in years. He smiled, but there was something in his expression, hesitation, maybe. Or restraint. Like he was holding back. And she hated how badly she wanted him not to. She knew this wasn't right. She knew where this could lead. But the part of her that craved this feeling, this warmth, this connection, was louder than her guilt. Louder than the voice in her head reminding her of the ring on her finger. This wasn't just attention. This wasn't just friendship. It was a need. A hunger for something she couldn't name. And with every second that passed, with every glance that lingered longer than it should, she was getting closer to crossing a line she could never take back. The rain tapped softly against the windshield as Lena sat in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, breath unsteady. She should have driven away by now. That would have been the smart thing, the right thing. But instead, she sat there, heart pounding, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror where she could still see Ethan standing by his car. Neither of them moved. It wasn't supposed to be this hard. She wasn't supposed to care this much. Yet here she was, chest tight, pulse racing, like a part of her was waiting for him to make the first move. Or maybe she was hoping he wouldn't. When she finally stepped out into the rain, she wasn't sure what she was doing. She told herself she just wanted to say goodbye. That it was nothing. But the moment she saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, hair damp from the rain, she knew it was a lie. He smiled when he saw her, but it didn't reach his eyes. They both felt it, the weight of everything left unsaid. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. Nothing that wouldn't make this worse, but silence had never felt so loud. She took a step closer, her breath hitching as the space between them disappeared. His eyes searched hers, and for a second, she thought he might kiss her. A part of her wanted him to. But he didn't move. Neither did she. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's warmth despite the cold. Her hand twitched at her side, aching to reach for him, but something held her back. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe it was the crushing weight of reality finally sinking in. I should go, she whispered. Her voice broke on the words. He nodded, but he didn't step away. Yeah. But neither of them moved. This was it. The moment where everything could change. A single choice, that's all it would take. One step, one touch, one kiss. And there would be no going back. But sometimes the hardest choice is walking away. She exhaled shakily, pulling herself back before she could change her mind. He watched her with a sadness she didn't know how to name. There was no anger. No blame. Just the quiet understanding that some things were never meant to be, no matter how badly you want them. As she got back into her car and drove away, the tears finally came. Not because she lost something, but because she almost had it. And sometimes, that's worse.